Hello everyone. My name's Professor Leanne Williams, and I am a Professor of Bioscience Education at the University of Warwick, where I still teach. But I'm also academic lead for LearnSci. So for those of you who don't know us at LearnSci, we're an edtech company, and we make resources for the STEM sector, essentially, looking at supporting students and educators in their analytical and technical skills teaching. But this is not about LearnSci today. This is about the community of innovative academics, educators who work relentlessly, as most of you do in academia, work relentlessly to make teaching the best it can be for students as well as our educators. And so I wanted to thank everyone for arriving. This is our first webinar in this series, and so I'm very excited about that. And we've got an exceptional talk to kick us off in this series. So please, if you're here at this talk, please sign up for the others. I'm sure you will get a lot from them. So we're focusing on digital innovation, and this is a recognition of the wider sort of teaching innovation within our LearnSci community. If you're interested in what we do in terms of educational research, we work globally across with lots of partners in education research. Please look at our websites and have a look, or message me, and I can talk to you about what options we have and what potential we have for collaborating. If you're interested in the TI Awards, the Teaching Innovation Awards, of course, again, please go to our website and find out any information to help you think about what you could possibly do to apply and get involved next year. At the end of this webinar, I will put up a little slide which will introduce the coming webinars, and also there'll be a QR code that you can use to sign up for if you're interested in finding out more about what we do. So I would like to not take too much more time. Again, this is a real opportunity for us to showcase the exceptional talents that we work with across the UK and across the globe, for people who do partner with us. But I also want to reiterate that this is not just about people who partner with us at LearnSci. This is recognizing the wider community of innovators. And so we will be really pleased to be showcasing speakers who are not partnering with us, but are still exceptional educators and have won awards from us and recognition from us. So I hope that set the scene a little bit. Just a few housekeeping rules, please. When you join, please mute. We would love to see you, so please feel free to turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing so, and if you have the bandwidth to do that as well. At the end of the session, so after my little introduction, Louise will be talking for about 20 to 30 minutes. We'll have then hopefully time, 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So hopefully we will finish within the hour. We may finish a bit earlier, but who knows? We'll see. And then you will have opportunities to ask questions. And if you feel like you are brave enough to put your hand up and speak, please do so. And so put your hands up. We'll go through the order, and then you can unmute yourself when we invite you to speak. Or if you wish, you can put your questions in the chat, which we will be eagerly watching throughout the talk. Just as a reminder, then we're recording the session, so if you would prefer not to be recorded, you can turn your cameras off, of course, and use the chat. But if you're okay with that, then that's wonderful. So that is it from me. I've almost stuck to my 5 minutes, which is not like me, and so I am really, really delighted to hand over to Dr. Louise and MacKenzie, who's going to go through talk and a project for which she did win a TI award from us. So thank you, Louise, and over to you.
So thank you very much, Leanne. I want to first of all say thank you very much. I've really enjoyed winning. I was very proud to win the Teaching Innovation Award. So a huge thank you to you, and I'll be putting it back onto my shelf after this. So my name is Louise MacKenzie. I'm an Associate Dean for Education and Student Experience at the School of Applied Sciences, University of Brighton. So if you don't know where Brighton is, it's one of the sunniest parts of the UK, down at the bottom southeast of the country. And we have a beach, stony as it is, but it is a beach. Now, in my role, I oversee the courses being delivered across all of pharmacy, biosciences, and then geography, ecology and environment. So quite a wide range. And I'm going to talk through like a global overview of what it means and why we're looking at this data. And then I'm going to take you through specifically what happens in a cohort of students when you have smart worksheets embedded and lab sims and things like that, and what happens when you don't. And you'll see the difference there and how extraordinary it can be, especially when you put this in place with other types of changes to your assessment planning as well, and how you can make a real difference to a wide range of people. And that, as educators, is one of our goals. That's what I believe. So let me take you through, just make sure. There we go. So first of all, I'm going to talk you through why monitor data in the first place and how you get that. I'm going to take you through some specific demographics. And this is going to be IMD Q1 and Q5, which you might not have heard about. So I'll explain what that is. And then the black-white students, obviously that's a more obvious group that most people have heard of. Then I'm going to talk you through the things that we think made the huge difference and the embedding of lab sims, smart worksheets, and then we also use for writing marking rubrics and 3-header feedback. And hopefully, because I know how passionate I can get about the subject, give you some time to discuss at the end. So hopefully Leanne will give me a heads up if I'm talking for too long. It's a huge subject and this can only give you a broad overview, and there's a lot of analysis that's gone on behind it. First of all, what are we measured by in universities? Because frankly, to be a university, you have to have certain metrics that you have to meet. Now, when I go to different meetings, I realise how few module leaders or course leaders really understand what the bigger context is. So I'm going to very briefly explain this to you. So we are measured by the Office of Students by certain differential outcomes. One, you've got continuation, as in, is the student still in study 1 year and 15 days after they registered? That's a really important metric. Then you've got the completion. So how many actually finished the degree after 3 years, or have they gone on to something else? And then you've got the progression. So 15 months after graduation, have they got a job? So all of this is absolutely fundamental to how a university is seen by the wider context in the sector. So on top of that, we've got an attainment of a good degree. So anybody who got 60%, as in a good degree, how do they do? So all of these are measured by. So when we're looking at how successful our assessments are, we are fulfilling, like, how does it fit into that? For attainment gaps, this is a slight difference. So we look at in a cohort of students for 1 year coming in, how well do different demographics do within that? And that's the bit that I'm going to talk you through, because that's the difficult bit. So sometimes, especially in some cohorts, it's quite an obvious feature. So for example, black-white students or Asian white student differences you can look at. One thing that we're really keen on is the index of multiple deprivation quintile. So basically, if you divide up the entirety of the UK by postcode and how affluent they are, they then divide that into 5 quintiles. So the quintile 1 are the most deprived, and the quintile 5 are the most affluent. And then you can say, all students who come from a poorer background, how do they perform compared to those from a richer background? And that's a really important measure, because that means quintile 1 is covering all the people who are most vulnerable at university to be able to afford it. They're working hard, etc., etc. They're the most mixed population because they're going to be made up from all the different demographics, say disabilities or age or so on and so forth. So I, to me, think looking at IMD Q1 is the most important sector to look at. And if you look at that demograph and then see how they progress through the degree, then you've got something. The other important thing about that is that they're most likely to withdraw from university. So if they don't make it through first year, 50% of them won't come back the next year, all right? So how do you find out whether things work or not? Because you can't do questionnaires, you can't find them, you can't talk to them. And so to me, they're the most vulnerable group to look at. So when I'm looking back on data from the last few years, I'm most interested in that group, because I think if you can make a difference there, you can make a difference to the whole experience for everybody. Thing is, all this data officially coming from the OFS comes about 2 years later. So you've got this weird buffer. So it's too late to make a difference for the ones that you want to make a difference to. So I'm very lucky at the University of Brighton, because we get data on a ClickSense tool that they've built. So I can look at the end of a module running and see exactly the pass rates by the demographics. And luckily, because of my role, I can then put that all together and see what are we doing that makes a difference. And I know this is making a difference because you can see all my stats here. This is for level 6, for example, from quintile 1 to 5. In orange, these are the quintile 1s. In 2022, they were not performing well. And by 2024, the bell curves are overlapping. So we did something right, that we are incredibly proud of ourselves at Brighton. This tells us that we can do it. But unfortunately, I know that half these students didn't make it to there because they left. So I want to make sure what's happening at level 1, or level 4, I should say, that's first year. How do I make a difference? Now, why equity of income? I've already explained some of it. But once you recognise unfairness, doing nothing is no longer neutral, and acting becomes the only right choice. It's a moral obligation. We should do something. Now, I'm looking at retrospective data, but then I can then repackage that to make sure the rest of the school are doing something similar, and then roll it out further. So we can make changes now before we get that B3 data coming in a couple of years out of date to us. So as I said, index of multiple deprivation is based on postcodes, and this is centralized data that comes in as students register. They're not identifying as, it's a fixed measure. So why is this important? Well, students from less affluent backgrounds have greater barriers to overcome: academic, financial, social, and things like that. Translate that into what it's like to come to uni. Generally, they are highly motivated, they've got greater resilience and persistence. They are determined to get the degree. So it's more about what we are failing them on rather than them failing. That's the way I want us to change the narrative and change the approach we take to this very vulnerable group. So these less affluent students are more likely to choose courses with clear employment and progression outcomes. So we need to make something that's applied through their course, through their degree, or the assessment, so that they can apply it near the end. And that's our duty to enforce. And this is where the approach using Smart Worksheets and Lab Sims come in so beautifully. So I knew, I've already said this, but IMD Q1 students were most likely to withdraw, and that really, really bothered me when I started this job a couple of years ago. I wanted to make sure, how do we make sure they continue? And I think we've managed to do a lot of this work. So I'm going to show you some data showing the IMD Q1 gap against the IMD Q5 group. So if I take all the stats, the pass mark, from those from the most rich backgrounds and compare it to those from the less affluent, we can see there's a grouping difference. So if I take all the levels from all of biosciences and I compare the poorest to the most affluent, there's a gap that's across all degrees. Okay, but level 4, this was much reduced. There's something we were doing that made a difference. And obviously I'm looking at retrospective data because I didn't really get this data till 2 years ago, or last year, I should say, and we could see something was working. So I wanted to do more on that. And then black-white differences, actually, we didn't really see a difference at level 4. So it's mostly an IMD Q1 postcode issue. Just for information, I've given you a percentage of the cohort that fall into the different groupings. So you can see we're quite well spread between IMD Q1 and 5, you know, the 15–20%ish. And we have we have a large cohort of Asian students, and all the other various demographics are represented within this data. So I just want to show we're not looking at a small minority. And the cohort size is usually about 180 to 240-ish. Every year. I'm not allowed to give too many specifics, so I hope that's okay. So something happened in our pass rates from here to here. So this is not significant, but this one is. So something happened. So I started to track it in more detail. And what I can say right from the beginning is it takes many adjustments. You can't just take one approach, and you can't focus on just one group. That's why IMD is good, because it's broad. I ensured where possible there was rubric marking and 3-heading feedback. That's within the last 2 years in written work. And then Smart Worksheets and Lab Sims were supporting the modules with analysis and lab work as well. So you can see this joined up cohesive way forward. Now, this is data where I took the modules from level 4 in the biomedical science pathway, and I compared those module pass rates with a smart worksheet compared to without a smart worksheet. And what's extraordinary is that the black students are doing really, really well. So are the white students, but without a smart worksheet, these, you can see in the red, the marks are much less, okay? If you look at IMD Q1, this grouping are not faring as well as those sorry, here it's in here, sorry. In IMD Q1, without the smart worksheets, the students are doing far worse than those modules with a smart worksheet. Can you see that? So I've color coded it so it pops out a little bit more. And you can see generally by the heat map, the red and orange is falling on the modules, the pass rates, without the smart worksheet. So something's working there. Now, by smart worksheets, I also mean there's a lot of lab sims in there as well. And I've just done a gap analysis, just comparing these as well. And over time, you can see that we embedded more fully in 2021, and then we brought in more writing support as well in 22, 23. So you see a progression of constant improvement, but based on an integrated approach across all these different metrics. So what happened over time? Let's go through this a little bit more and break that down. So first of all, smart worksheets were based, I think it was 2020, I brought them in for biochemistry in first year, and then we brought that into blood science level 4, so I can then put those two modules together, and then the other modules have been pulled together as well. In written feedback, we started using 3-header feedback, so there was a general consensus on how we give consistent feedback to every student on any written work, and then we introduced rubric marking, and there was a bit of a change of assessment in 24-25, so I haven't included that data because it stands a little bit different. First of all, I want to talk about the lab sims, because this is something that is so important to have, but it's it's behind the scenes, it's formative work, basically. So if you have lab sims and smart worksheet data, I was trying to go back in time for how much I had. We don't have the data from that, so it's my fault for not keeping my records. But you can see we're progressively increasing the usage of lab sims and smart worksheets. So the students are, once you embed it and integrate it so that students have to use it, or they then realize how good it is, they can't kind of keep going back and keep using it. Our usage went from 4,556 usage, which I thought was quite good. So shockingly, and I was so impressed, this year, over 17,700 usage. That's amazing. So we've had this uphill trajectory. So it's fully embedded, it's really used, and students determined to use it. So the lab sims, because it's formative, I don't have a way of showing, directly that impact, but just the usage and the pass rate going up tells me that students are going along prepared for the coursework, the assessments that they're going to do in the labs. They know what they're going to do, and then they get their data and then they analyze it with smart worksheets. So that works. But also this is more than that, I think. This is sort of embedding a culture that they need to go back and reuse it until they get it. So I'm sure with the other talks you'll hear more about lab sims, but I think this is a really fundamental thing. And remember, for each of these, somebody's not marking it. They are working on their own agency at home in their own time. Why is that important with IMD Q1 students? Well, proportionately more of them are working full time, and they need to be able to do this work in their own time at home or on the commuter train or whatever they've got on. They can do it, and they do. When you trust them to get on with it, they do it. And that's the extraordinary, wonderful thing about this. And no staff are having to hawk over them, ticket or mark anything. It's just done on their own independent manner. So one of the ways I've started to embed it, I've basically mapped it out. This is right from the beginning. Basically, here's the different sheets that they could use, how it was linked to different practicals or lectures, and then they could work through in their own way and just tick off what they'd done. I think that's come a long way since then, but that's how I started off embedding and getting students to do it. I'd have a workshop going, here's how you do it. And they still do that now in that module. Example pictures, I'm sure Leanne can show you some more, but this is the sort of thing, in case you haven't come across Lensai Labsense, this is the sort of thing you can do. So the second major thing was embedding the self-marking worksheets, which we know work. This is the first one we had built, again, in the biochemistry, apparently very, very complicated. So don't leave me to do these things. I've got other people doing these things now. And you've got the wonderful library that can do this already pre-made that you can embed. So we increasingly use them. The data I was showing you was based on the biomedicals, but we also have the foundation, which covers a large number of other courses. So I'm not really showing that here, but they are all embedded and all used. And they save an enormous amount of marking time. There was 391 hours of marking, which very generously was at 10 minutes per worksheet. Frankly, we were putting about half an hour to an hour of work. So, you know, I think it's far more than what has been estimated on their portal. An example, just very briefly, because you'll see other examples of this elsewhere, this is the sort of data that they would be putting in. And so the students would be putting in all their data from their own generated data from the lab. They'd fill it all out, have to do these calculations. And as you can see, mean rates was something that a staff member would then have to calculate to check. It's done automatically. The student, if they got it wrong, so they would have gotten some feedback that they can then go, oh, that's how you do it. And then, as you can see, they then got it right because they had their own data and they could correct it. In the past, the mark would be far less because they would have repeated that error and that mark would have carried across and continued through all of this data. Instead, they had a chance to correct it and make good and then get a really good score. Thing is, you get resistance from staff because they get a bit shocked that students are getting good marks. And I go, well, it's numerical. It's either right or it's wrong. So you just have to get over that hurdle and encourage people to accept and get on with it. And in those who found it really resistant, I said, sit down and do it yourself and you will find it's actually really hard. So get on, and I do encourage you to try out all of this sort of thing. So benefits of using this method is you get immediate feedback, the students get instant feedback on their performance, and this helps them to move on if they get stuck. That's really, really important. Enhanced learning, so their embedded explanations really help direct the students and reinforces their knowledge and understanding. It's hugely efficient. Don't underestimate how much this reduces workload for academics. So that means you can focus more on the side of teaching and assessments elsewhere. So this really does help with the burden. And it's a really exciting way. Once students start doing it, be prepared to hear that they want more. So that's what I would encourage you to look at. It's really improved the enhanced feedback, and we get this in the NSS, we get it through other sorts of questionnaires as well. And it really is important, especially if it's for an accredited biomedical science degree, is that you have individualized data sets. So the students get their own data from the lab, or it can be randomized and set up for you to be individualized. So lots and lots of benefits to this. It's really improved basically the ability for students to have their own analysis, and it's really, really accurate from that. The time spent on marking has really crashed out. It's really helped with that, especially as we're going through different restructures in all our different universities. We have to find smarter ways to work, and this really helps. And I think I've spoken about these, feed forwarding to correct responses. Marking is known as the student progresses through the worksheet. They like knowing how they're doing. So if they're not doing so well, they might stop, go and talk to somebody, get support before they carry on. And the students really, really love it. That's part of the reason why it keeps building in my school, is because they know and they recognise it, so they want more. Pitfalls, as with everything, they've got something that might not be great. For the bespoke ones I found personally, because I'm not that good, was that I needed time to set up the worksheet, but actually from the last one I had set up through one of the second year modules, it was incredibly quick. So this was historical to me. It took time, mostly from my side rather than LearnSci side. Small tweaks on mark distribution could be required if it's sort of, waiting. So you do need to keep an eye on that. Resistance to change, this comes from the academics themselves. They can be, oddly enough, sort of resistant to adopting something that automates all of this. But once they get experience of it, they actually tend to want to have more themselves as well. So one of the things that they found most shocking was that students were getting much better grades. But as I would say, we no longer mark them on in the way that you would with written lab work. But who needs lab write-ups in the same way anymore? We have to change the way we approach pedagogy these days. And so we need to adjust to what is the real world requirement that's needed, which is the analysis of the data and understanding it, not necessarily writing a lab report, which has a very different set of skills. One other thing to notice is the lab protocol might actually need to be adapted to fit with the analysis that you want done, but that to me is something that's worth doing because of the benefits that you gain from this. So moving on to the third thing that I brought in, which is not LearnSci based, is the embedding of rubrics and three-heading feedback. One of the things about written feedback is staff are doing it very differently across all the school, and I'm sure many people have found this within their own courses or modules, is trying to get a consistent approach. So we did across the school 2 years ago, we always use Turnitin anyway, but I brought in embedded rubrics for a lot of marking, a lot more than we used to. And I started getting the criteria set out on the mid-mark so we could start avoiding those awful borderline marks with the 9s, 0s and 1s and move to the mid-grade so that we'd no longer have this hazy, is it a 2-1 or is it a 2-2? People will generally mark downwards, so this forces them into a mid-grade. Things are either a 2-2, 2-1 or first generally, so just try and stick to that. And that has a huge bearing on how students perform as well. We can weight the criteria differently, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. The great thing is students get really consistent insight on how the mark is achieved, which is the big thing that they find most frustrating, and that the grade descriptors match the mark that they get. And it all makes sense. So since I've been pushing for this to be in all the written submissions, the students have been much happier. And in fact, if there isn't a rubric, they then complain. Where's the rubric? In fact, this year, one module in second year didn't have it, and all the staff started to complain. Where's the rubric? We need one for consistent marking. And if you have a team of 10, 20 people sometimes marking, it's the best way to have an agreed mark really consistently, and it's embedded in. So to me, this is the best way forward for large group marking as well. And to make sure, obviously, you get a rubric which shows how the grade was achieved, but then having the three-heading feedback as well makes it more personal, and the staff have to write that. So that's what we also do. This is an example of a grading rubric that gets embedded in Turnitin. You can see I've got different structure. This is for literature review. So I've got criteria of structure, literature, content, critique and referencing. Obviously, you can choose your own versions. And then I take a scale that goes all the way from 0 and most shockingly for an academic to 100, which I think in some institutions, people find it very difficult to go above 70. So I've been pushing this, and actually we find that because it's so consistent, staff are finding it much easier to give the grades that I think are more deserved. So it really helps with that good degree outcome that students really well deserve, and gives confidence to academics to mark in those higher bands or know where they should sit for all of these things. Just to show you the weighting on how this works. So for example, of that rubric, it means over different levels. So level 4 is year 1, going up to level 6, which is year 3. You can weight them in a different way. So you can have referencing. You probably need less ability to be that accurate because by then they should be using endnotes. whereas you want them to have more critical analysis of there by level 6. So you can weight it in this way so that you can, over time, the student gets used to their rubric for certain types of assessment, and then over time that the weighting changes. And if you do this with the criteria always falling on the mid grades, you avoid all those pesky borderlines. Or you could just have them have an A marking rubric without a slide rule. That's fine as well. But anything that breaks down that grade so the student knows where they sit, how it was achieved, that tells them everything they need to then move on to the next assessment and take forward what works for them. So a real summary of what changed in the biomedical science level 4. So those modules across all those different assessments. Those students felt more prepped for lab work, thanks to the lab sims. We also had little videos if we didn't have a lab sim. It gave lots and lots of ownership of the assessment to the students so that they could get on with the work in their own time. That's where the Smart Worksheets really worked. It meant that we weren't marking students down over really minor errors. In fact, it meant that they were focused on the analysis, which is the important part that we need students to be able to achieve, not whether or not they put subscript in the right place or really small grammatical errors. That should not be counting towards what grades they're getting. It really should be, in this day and age, about their real world application of what they can achieve and do. And this is the exciting thing that we can move towards. It means that numeracy-based assessments all get much higher scores, and this can be difficult for a lot of academics, but you've got to remind them it's either right or it's wrong. You're not saying it's the quality of how you wrote the 7, but is the 7 correct? And that's what we need to move towards, and this is why these work so well. And once you get over that, then you will find that people want them more and the students want them more. So we also, for written submissions, we use more rubric marking and the more consistent model with the 3 headers feedback, which I believe is being used by quite a lot of other unis as well. So it's all in keeping with the sector. So my approach, generally, because this is what my title was, is that it's structural design, not student deficit, that shapes outcomes. And it's no longer about who fails, but what fails them on their way. And as I showed at the beginning of that bell curve, every demographic should fit within the same overlapping demographic bell curve. It doesn't matter who you are, you should fit within. If it's a fair assessment, they should overlap. You always have a difference of ability, but it shouldn't be based on your demographic at all. So to make that an effective plan within whatever level you're working in, whether it's module, course or school or faculty, whatever, you need to make sure you've got a good data-led approach if you can, and that can be very difficult with the way data is managed currently in different universities. I'm really lucky that our university is invested in this system, so I can look almost in real time on how things are working. You need somebody to evaluate the data. Data is nothing unless you have some way of translating it. So having that oversight, it's been one of the best things about my job. Is I am a bit of a nerd, I have to admit, and I really like looking at what worked, what didn't work, and how to get that good practice shared out and really embed it in a way that even if people are resistant, it is the only way forward. So that makes me sound a bit more despotic than I am, but it works if you can work as a team to make sure the best practice goes out. If it's easier and better for everybody because you get better outcomes for everybody, then it becomes the only logical way forward. So you can't do it overnight. You have to build it over time. And that embedding into the curricula, you need the whole team on board. Now, again, people's behaviour fits on a bell curve. You'll get the early adopters and you talk to them first. Then you get the middle adopters who follow quite like, oh, that works, I'll do that. And then you get the resistance. And that's fine. Get the early adopters to talk to the resistance, and you'll find that slowly you'll move that bell shape of behaviour towards the goal that you want, which is a better outcome for everybody. One thing just to note, and I have noticed this in discussions with different people from different universities, is that with all of this equity talk, Some universities or some groups have just looked at one demographic at a time. And what you find is that when you improve it there, it gets worse for somebody else. So be careful on how you approach this. I've been looking at how to make something good practice across the board for everybody. And by doing so, we've seen the gap completely gone for all the grades across the board in biosciences. For black white, there is a 0% difference. Those bell curves overlap. I'm very proud of that. And I want to see that carry on. So don't just focus on one demographic, concentrate on many. And that's why IMD is very good, because it captures all of them and they're the ones who need the most support. So a huge thank you to all the library resources that we've been given. It's been a brilliant resource. I do encourage you to embed it and to look at other data-driven and digital means to improve your courses for everybody. So I'm very happy to take questions, if that's okay.
Thank you, Louise. That was fantastic and great timing. I love that. It's given us plenty of time to ask for questions. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you again for being our first presenter. I'm just going to like to ask you a first question, please, if that's all right for myself, and then I'm going to open the floor to everybody else. I mean, I've got so many questions, but I think others might ask those questions. One of the things that you touched on, something that I'm really interested in at the moment, is moving beyond that one and done mindset. So moving beyond, just getting students to move away from just like, I've done it, now I'm going to move on. I'm not going to learn from that process. I'm not going to learn from that feedback. I've done it, I'm going to move on because I've got lots of other things to do and my priority list, you know, is massive. Have you got possibly any anecdotal evidence or any, we got the numbers where you can see that there's a big usage numbers was increased. But I was wondering what your thoughts were on how you perhaps have changed that cultural mindset of that learner behavior. Something I'm really interested in, learner behavior, how you've enabled your students to get beyond that, just get it done and over with. What do you think has changed?
It's an interesting point. We know that they do engage. It might not be in the way that we were taught ourselves when we were at uni. Yeah. They engage in different ways, and we need to adapt to that and understand this generation far more than I think we're really misunderstanding a lot. We have to trust them a lot more. If I talk to foundational first year students, their knowledge and understanding is vastly different to a third or fourth year. I see them, so they are doing it. And so I think one thing, because I have discussed this sort of thing with students about, like, are you moving forward? Are you reading all this stuff? Are you taking on board? They say, one, I get told, especially when I was a course leader, we really want to learn. That's why we're paying so much to do a degree. And I really think that many academics don't see that because they don't see them necessarily in the lecture hall. And I just think actually they are. And I've got stats to show that they are doing it in their own time. Might be a month or two later, but they are doing it. They are taking on. Secondly, all that feedback, they are poring over those comments generally and trying to understand it. And one of the things was our NSS scores for assessment feedback, this is general in the sector, was really low. And we were not very happy with it, as was many other unis. I remember having long discussions about this with others. And we improved that very, very quickly because they were engaging with that feedback to feed forward. And we know that the natural progression, they are, you know, if they stay at 2-2 throughout their degree or 2-2 and come out with a first, they have taken on board and learned and developed. And on top of that, the NSS scores, as soon as we were doing this, our NSS scores is now above sector. So we did do the right thing that answered what they were looking for. And I had all sorts of weird innovations of what might be the way forward, but keeping it simple and consistent was by far the most important way. So I think we have to, one, trust them a little bit, and two, give it in a form that's small enough and not overwhelming. I mean, some people were giving 1,000-word feedback. It's like, no, or spoken word ones, which actually, well, if you listen to my feedback, my phone message, you would understand I don't listen to. I would want it written. So, you know, there's too many people trying to do too many weird things. Be consistent, keep it simple, and they go, oh, that's what I need to do, so that's what I need to do. And trust them, they do actually look.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I could carry on talking to you for hours. Okay, so has anybody else got any questions? Please feel free to put your hands up, and then I can go through them in order. If anyone else can ask, has anything interesting or wants Louise to go through and clarify any of the other data that she has, please put your hands up. Okay, Bill.
Hi, Louise. Thanks for that great talk. I'm interested to know how the students, when they reach the end of their sort of academic career in their final year, doing projects, if you see any difference in the intervention because of the interventions you make early on. Do their skills and abilities translate into running more, being able to work more independently or to take on more ambitious projects? Do you see anything like that, or is that hard to measure?
It is hard to measure, but you saw that bell curve I showed you, the level 6 students. If you think that was level 6 IMDQ1s before we had the embedding of any of this digital tools, but by 2023-24, they would have had LearnSci Smart Worksheets at an earlier stage. So by the time they got to third year, those bell curves were overlapping. I think we are training them to analyze and think through. So I believe it's very hard to prove it. I've done lots of analysis because third year we don't really have it embedded yet. Obviously we've got the library where we will be putting some more in this year, the next academic year. But and we know that the average mark for final year projects is slightly adjusting and going up. So I think I'd need to do a lot of deep dive analysis to try and pinpoint that. But yeah, I think anecdotally, I would say yes. Does that answer your question?
Yes, great. Thanks.
Fantastic. So if anybody else has got any questions, please raise the hand or put it into the chat. Brilliant. Christine.
Hello. I wanted to ask just about the feedback that you're giving students. I think having it be consistent, I think, is really important. But I just want to get clear in my head. So you're giving them a rubric that says like, your abstract was a 55, your intro was a 75.
Yeah.
And then this 3-header feedback. I've not encountered 3-header feedback before, but it was what they're doing well, what they're struggling with, and what they want to think about in the next assessment.
That sort of thing. I mean, a lot of unis are doing 3 headers and naming it slightly differently. We piloted it here slightly differently, and that's gone institutional throughout the Brighton University. And it's strengths, like you said, and then it was, so basically how to improve and then for the future. So it's very similar. Like I said, the wording's changed. But what was the rest of the question? Sorry.
So are you not also annotating their work and giving them annotations back?
Yes. So everything's through Turnitin. We've said, the annotations inside that to not do too much of it because students were finding it overwhelming and you can't find it half the time. You have the rubric to set how it's marked, and then you get the consistent great descriptors are embedded then. So if it's a 2-1, they get a good mark. So good is used so that means that you haven't got people saying, oh, it's adequate when actually it's good. So that made that consistent. And then for the personal feedback, like the 3 headers, that's why it's there as well. So depending on the size of you have all 3, and students really liked that. It meant that they could get the feedback to the level that they wanted. Yeah, is that something that they're doing at your institution?
Yeah, so I'm at Warwick, and we have various assessments that are big cohorts, so they're marked by a lot of people, and getting that consistency is tricky.
Yes.
Occasionally we get a marker that's really keen and they want to give more feedback, and then they go kind of ham on the annotations and stuff. And as you say, sometimes the students find that quite overwhelming, and also then because it's an inconsistency across other students, and I wonder if you've had issues with that for certain markers, they're feeling that they're actually giving less feedback than they would have under their own score.
So one of my team, I had audits going through every assessment is is 3 headers being used in the text box? Is it being used consistently? And if they didn't, they got an email, and then I tracked that. So I would keep an eye on them, and then go and have a lot of people got knocked on the door the last couple of years, and those numbers have been decreasing with time. It takes persistence along to get that consistency, but it does work. But you have to be absolutely fixated on it. But it works. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
It's a great question. I think consistency is such a difficult target to hit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because consistency of academics, understanding the rubric and having the time and the patience and the know-how to write effective feedback. And it's a skill that many academics don't really get trained to do or get the opportunity to learn how to do that. But also then it's the students reading the feedback. I know that there are still cohorts of students that don't even look at their feedback or don't even look at their scores sometimes, because they have a fear of that feedback and a fear of seeing where they've gone wrong. Is that something that you've come across? And if anybody else has come across this in their own institutions, would love for a comment on that.
I can quickly say from here, because we can see on Turnitin if they've opened it. So not just looked at the grade, but they've actually opened the document. And from the assessments I've looked at, there's a large proportion do. I mean, you'll have a tail end who don't, but I would say it's more like 80-20 for reading it. So I think that is actually part of the culture here, is to look at it, and they can go back to the module leader to get more and go and talk about it. So that that opens up that door to go and do that. And we have 3 headers in some exam papers as well. So at the bottom you can see tick 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 how they got that mark. So if it's
okay,
yeah,
interesting, brilliant. Katie.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. Like, is anyone using students providing feedback on the feedback? Because I know that was a thing a few years ago. I don't know if it's disappeared now.
We don't do that here so much, because we rely on student voice to feedback how they feel about things, and we have other kind of questionnaires, and then the NSS obviously is our big marker of did it work. So we've been using that more than feedback on the feedback, because that was so convoluted. I remember doing that at my last institution. All the work.
And I think students get feedback fatigue as well, and it's like pulling teeth, isn't it? I think most of us don't get hardly any of our module feedback to start with, which is a shame. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions, but if anybody else has got anything to ask, that would be fantastic. Tony.
Hi, Louise. Thanks for that. I thought it was great. One thing that really stuck out to me when you were talking was when you said, once unfairness is visible, inaction isn't neutral. There's a moral obligation to redesign learning systems. Now, champion that kind of position of change in a big organization is challenging and it's tricky. Do you have any advice of how to kind of do that and make it successful?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, because obviously I only got this data a year ago, started to get that level of data. So the good practice we had in place happened to be the right place. It was along the right track, luckily. Other schools didn't have that. So they are starting to go, oh, okay, how do I make that difference? So because it's, in this school, it's a lot of analysis that kind of worked. It was a natural fit. We just happened to be doing the right thing. And we were looking at modules with high fail rates, first of all. So that worked. So the tactic I've been taking this year, now I knew that was working, is to look at any module with I cut off at 8%, any module which had a fail rate of over 8% across the whole school. And then I went knocking on their doors on what we could do about that. So it takes sheer determination, a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of uncomfortable conversations, and a plan. So I had an immediate plan of what can be done this year, right now, what can be done for next year so we can get it through the module spec changes, and then what's our long-term goal, which is to have no inequity. In this, the current school is going through a restructure, so I hopefully will be part of a team to see this further and wider. So I will be taking that forward as a bigger goal, but the institution needs to make that a goal as well, I think. Otherwise you don't get the resources. You need to have something that helps drive you as well. And I think we all believe in it, in equity and parity of outcome now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tony, for that question. So is there any, are there any data, Louise, that you feel like you don't yet have access to that would make this even better? I'm just thinking about the different institutions that we work with have such a variety of access to data of their own students. It can be really difficult, but is there anything that you think that, you know, you could have that would make things better for you?
So the data that can be hardest to get to is intersection, because you're dealing with smaller numbers.
Yeah.
I find it easier. I mean, on this, I worked in percentage to show you, because obviously and on a large course, but if I work on a smaller course, a high percentage can mean 1 or 2 people. So you have to, that is difficult. It's intersection data, but also on a module, like I can see pass and fail on how the module behaves, but not on the component within. And so if I want to look specifically at protected characteristics with, say, any module with a smart worksheet, I'd need to work with you to get that, and then I need special permission to work out who's what under which demographic. So that is something that is more tricky, and for rightly so, because it's protected, and it's GDPR and data protection and blah blah blah. Absolutely. So that is harder. So at the moment I'd like to be able to track students as well, which is another difficult thing to do. And then you've got to make sure, what is the biggest question we're asking? So are you shifting on a moral point, as Tony pointed out? Are we doing it for the right reasons? Yes. And then is it going to be enough to make the big change that you see in B3? Because that takes a real shift in culture, practice. Everything has to realign to make that B3 change, because those are huge cohorts. So it is difficult to, and then you don't know if it's worked for another couple of years, because OFS data is based on cohort, not like incoming cohort, not what you're seeing in the classroom, because some people repeat. It's very, very complex, the data, when you start looking at it.
Yeah. So
I'm lucky I've got what I have. I don't think many other institutions are releasing it so easy to get IMDs. So
I think it's interesting as well. We're in some of the research projects that we're working with, we're looking at Tundra data and not necessarily IMDb data.
Nice.
So that allows that tracking process. But the difficulty is that you have the students, you can only work with the students you have in front of you, but actually there'll be certain cohorts on minority students that are underrepresented that don't even get into university. So you will have small numbers of certain cohorts, but that makes it really difficult then to use to statistically evaluate what your processes are to help those minority students. So it would be interesting then to maybe backwards extrapolate to see where the students are dropping off before they even come to university. So then your methods and your processes will really help those students if we can prompt those. So I do feel there's a bit of a disconnect between the higher education sector and the pipeline that comes in to enable us to put in the practices that you have done to make things better for everybody.
The B3 equivalent is called APP, and they do 4-year collated data. So, you know, you could have one difference 1 year, but it's only the aggregate 4 years that actually gets counted by the OFS and the TEF. So I mean, honestly, to shift anything on that dial is really hard work, and it's very data driven these days. We can't afford to not be data driven. So it's important to what tools you get these days. So
brilliant. Okay, well, we've got a couple more minutes. If anybody has got any burning questions, please do so now. Or you can, I'm sure, contact and reach out to Louise when you have the time to. I would just like to just show the next 2 talks that are coming up. Hopefully I can share my screen if this is the right one, where you can see that we have two more presenters coming, hang on a second, coming next time. So we've had Louise and of course we've now got a series of webinars coming up. So the next one on the 19th is a really, really interesting topic of preparing students for communication. We all know that students are struggling with communication, particularly verbal communication. I really, really recommend you come and see this. And then, of course, then we've got Kirsty Watts from Glasgow, who's going to give us all a masterclass essentially on how to incorporate AI ethics into your curriculum. If you're interested in any of the products that have been discussed or any of the resources that have been discussed, please use this QR code and sign up, and we can get back to you with some information about that. So thank you so much, everybody. We will stop the recording shortly, and if you want to come back and revisit it, please do so. And we will post that. We will make that available to our community as soon as possible. Thank you again for attending our first webinar. I hope you got something from it, and hopefully we will see you in the next webinar series. Thank you so much.